Shuly, thank you so much for coming on to SheLeads. I am so excited to have you on the show and just hear from you, so thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on launching this really great, medium and ability to have a lot of voices. Really appreciate it.
Of course. So, Shuly, you are the co-founding partner of UpWest Labs, a pre-seed and seed stage Silicon Valley fund who invests in Israel's most promising young entrepreneurs and really help them break into the U.S. market. But before UpWest Labs, you've really been involved in this space and really building this bridge between U.S. and Israel tech for 20 plus years. And you helped found the California-Israel Chamber of Commerce, where it's almost this business platform for tech exchanges to happen between Israel and U.S. And you were also named among 100 most influential people in Israeli high tech. So very excited to just talk to you and get to know you better. So what I love to start off is kind of take me back to when you were my age, 22 years old. You went to SF State, San Francisco State University, studying international relations. You also went to Grenoble University in France and studied French studies.
Yes.
But at this point, what did you imagine your career like? What did you want to be? What questions were you asking yourself?
Quick reminder that I also came out of the Israeli military during that time.
Big part, yeah.
Which was really an incredible for me opportunity to kind of throw me into an environment that was high pressure, very intense, at a very young age, and demanded that you kind of rise up to the occasion really quickly as a young teen. Right. I mean, as a young adults, like 18-year-old, and I think that informed me a lot in both the things that I believed about myself that I thought I'm incapable of doing, and all of a sudden you kind of being pushed to your limits on all fronts, both physically as well as mentally, and I think that's what happens to a lot of people at that age in Israel who are going into the military service. And I think that really helped me, come out of a shell, if you will, of of a teenage kid. And that's also informed me in going forward in always challenging kind of the comfort zone that I'm in, and knowing that I can go through barriers and come out okay on the other side. And I think that's one thing that I think a lot of young people are dealing with right now, and it's just really, I'm seeing it in the context of 18-year-olds who are graduating from college right now and thinking about what's happening in our world today. And there is a lot of, really, there's a lot of really, kind of fear and understanding and not experiencing these kinds of, epidemics and lockdowns and curfews and uprising. For many of these kids in America, I think that's something that, it's important to understand that generations before have gone through, and people have gone through really rough times and came out okay, and actually even stronger from times like this. So so what I'm trying to say is that, my young self in early 20s, has already gone through 2 years of military service where, I was, kind of plucked out of my parents' house, which was really comfortable and comforting, into, a system that really kind of, very intense. And I came out okay and even better. So that's I think is that really important point And I think earlier in my career, as you mentioned, I wanted to discover a lot still about who I am, what I'm gravitating to, what really is interesting for me. And as you mentioned, I was in Grenoble for a couple of years in France. Then I moved to San Francisco and grew and really kind of grew a lot through being part of organizations that are working more with international, issues. And just to remind you that the late 90s, early 2000s were mainly kind of marked by the globalization around the world. This was the European Union coming together. This was, environmental organizations trying to tackle a lot of issues, anti-disarmament organizations, anti-poverty organizations. And all of that really fascinated me, and I really wanted to be part of making a difference and, making change. And so I was involved in organizations like that early in my career because I really, really, truly believe that the world is really going to going to connect and we're going to bridge all these differences, and we're going to prevent all the wars and all the hardships and all the poverty. And I wanted to really be part of that conversation. And so I got to really be involved in a lot of that early on with fabulous people, and learn a lot from a lot of people who were on the political side, people who were on the NGO side. And I learned a lot during that time about the nonprofit world and how, people are advocating for topics, raising money for those things, for causes, mobilizing communities to rally behind a cause or a topic or an issue, creating kind of think tank processes and things like that. And that was really fascinating for me kind of early on in my career. And I think that informed me a lot in also how I later on kind of got into the tech business and the tech industry, and started working with entrepreneurs and innovators.
Yeah. So I think there's so many incredible insights just from that answer, in the sense, like when you're talking about the IDF and the Israeli army, I think like Startup Nation, the book really highlights how much of an impact it has on kind of creating this startup ecosystem in Israel. And I think it's very important to note how important and like how it really forces these young Israelis to mature like so quickly. And an even important lesson is the fact that you really grow from these uncomfortable times and from these challenging times. And in the moment, it's hard to see, but kind of when you reflect back, you're just like, wow, I became a whole different person during that experience. So I think it's very important, and especially everything happening today. I think it's definitely a great lesson.
Yes.
And then
it is.
Yeah. So now I'm wondering, as you mentioned, you really became involved in tech. When did you realize that, or when did you almost observe this bridge that needs to happen between America and Israel? And like you really saw, okay, this is how we could help the Israeli entrepreneurs even prosper more by breaking into the U.S. market and vice versa.
So I was very fortunate, to be approached by already a community of tech leaders here in Silicon Valley who were looking to mobilize, the kind of the U.S. tech community and the tech giants around here to look for more opportunities in Israel. And, I was already involved somehow when they asked me to lead the organization and to kind of build a platform. And for me, it wasn't so much about the innovation and the tech, and it was more about how do I mobilize a group of people who know nothing about the opportunity in Israel and how do I find these stakeholders and influencers and people with so much ability to impact? How do I bring them together? How do I create for them kind of a common place to then inform them and being able to, with them, continue and build this platform? And we really started with like 100 people who were already kind of on that bridge. But this is, mind you, this is the time pre-Google, pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter. Wow. So social networks didn't exist really. Yeah. And so we kind of had to piece together, people had to build a network without having these tools that everyone have today in order to do that. And I think, LinkedIn was just starting and some other kind of business social networks were starting out. It's interesting. I was actually user number 20,000, I think, on LinkedIn. And
that's crazy.
I was an early adopter. And I think it was because I was building a network and I really needed a tool. And Reid Hoffman, who started the company, kind of was in a circle of people that I've known. And somebody said, hey, join this network. And it was the same with Twitter. And it's just really interesting because all these tools today enabling a lot of the founders that I work with to bridge, into their industries and into new markets and all of that. But at the time, we really didn't have technology that enabled us to do that. So you had to rely on building personal relationships one by one and creating really kind of a common place. And it was a lot in person. I'm always thinking about what if we didn't have all this technology that we're having today, and we had a pandemic and that we couldn't be talking like that on Zoom and we couldn't connect businesses through, all sorts of platforms and communicate with employees and doing all of that. So at the time, I feel ancient when I tell you about it, but at the time, really, that all of that was kind of very nascent, and it was right after the .com, bust in San Francisco, and people were actually rising from the ashes of that. And that's another lesson I think that kind of informs me today as we're seeing. We're going into recession, and it'll probably be deep recession for a number of years. We're going to see a lot of changes in our society and a lot of changes of how people are doing things. And I think that, experiencing those before, and I remember clearly the year 2000, when people really left San Francisco. There was massive exodus from the city, and we've experienced, that deep recession there. A lot of people were unemployed, but some great companies came out. Some really great, technologies evolved from that situation. Amazing entrepreneurs with great resilience. So that's, something that I kind of try to hold on to right now, knowing that it's probably going to be rough, and we're all going to be affected by it.
Definitely. And it's actually interesting how you mentioned, so the idea where you had to meet them in person and really develop these strong personal relationships. I think oftentimes with social media, that aspect kind of gets lost, and it's almost like you have to remember how important it is to form those relationships and everything. So I think it's very telling of like the importance of that. So I'm wondering, you are obviously like the different cultures, like, so you're very ingrained in the culture with the Israeli culture and the Americans. I'm wondering, did you ever encounter like challenges amongst bridging those two cultures together? Or even today, do you find yourself teaching these these Israeli entrepreneurs kind of how to adjust to American culture and also the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, I must say that the younger generation of entrepreneurs out of Israel are so worldly, right? I mean, they've traveled the world after the army. They've, they have access to information. They went studying abroad. They've done a lot of things so there's just sophistication that is just really amazing. And this is what I really love about, I think, investing in Israeli founders is that they really, really, I think from day one, are super curious and interested about what's happening in different markets, whether it's Asia or US or anywhere. And because, so many of them have traveled the world and have experienced, other cultures and embracing other cultures. And so I think we see differences for sure. There's just a different way of us communicating. There's this different way of us thinking about short-term versus long-term.
Right.
I think Israelis are much more, have been much more short-term kind of thinkers because survival, because kind of the environment you kind of, growing into. They're also very transactional in the way they are communicating, right? They want to get to tachlis. They want to understand, let's get to the bottom of things, They're not, the small talk and all of that, it just doesn't speak to them. So a lot of times, I think that is one thing that is really hard to learn when you move to a new culture and we work or do business in the US, and understand that people really need to trust you. People need to really develop a connection to you. And a lot of that is going to happen in different small nuances of communicating and finding shared common ground. Yeah. And for that communication has to happen. And it has to be conversations about, your life's passion. It could be about your travel. It could be about your favorite, basketball team. It could be about the weather or about places you lived in or schools you attended. So all of that, we know in American culture, creates a lot of times the comfort zone for you to then go and do business. And in Israel, you just don't need that because everybody knows everyone. We all had common experiences because we all did the military and we all know somebody that knows someone. It's just really super connected. So, instead of doing all of that small talk, we just get right to business and we say what we want and we say how we want it and we expect people to just, tell us as it is. And I think that is where a lot of times things are being lost in translation when Israeli founders and American business people coming together, is because there is just a lot of, what Israelis perceive as vagueness on the American side, and Americans think there is too much directness on the Israeli side. But I must say that, I've seen things, I've seen people really evolve really quickly on both sides, in doing this. And it's fascinating to see that, actually. Yes.
Yeah. So that's actually so interesting just to kind of hear the differences in culture and kind of how experiences really shape you, honestly, and how the IDF and everything has really allowed Israelis to have this shared bond that they kind of are able to just get right to it. So I love that. So now tell me about UpWest Labs. What inspired you to found this VC fund and really get started and really make a statement?
So, I never really thought that this is what I would be doing. Yeah. Although I've touched venture and I've touched investments along the way, and have been kind of on the periphery of it so much in the last 20 years through VCs that have been working with, through founders that I was helping through the US market. So I was always in that world, but definitely starting a fund in 2011 with my co-founder was something that, we looked at, number one, because we want to make a difference that was kind of a long-term thinking about the challenge of Israelis being far away from the markets is there. And it's been there for a long time, and it probably will stay there for a long time. It's just geography and it's just scale, right? I mean, Israel is small. The US is the first market for 90% of the startups. how do you bridge that? How do you build a company that is global and massive and meaningful? And over the years, we just saw, some of the gaps, some of the inability of companies to accelerate their time to market. And we both really wanted to really take that challenge on and build a platform and something that will enable these founders to really help them through this process. Yeah. And so this obviously started as a fund. So we invested in every entrepreneur that we worked with. And we were the first check and wrote first check to founders who literally had, not much, but a vision and a lot of kind of technical conviction and knowledge and experience. And then seeing through their evolution over the years in building massive companies. And it's really incredibly rewarding to see that. Obviously a lot of companies don't succeed. A lot of companies fail through the process. A lot of companies evolve very early on. And seeing all of that for the last almost 9 years has been, a really incredible learning process, both for me and my founder, as well as, for everybody that's been involved with what we've been doing. And so it's allowed me, starting UpWest really allowed me to dive deeper, both into technology and, what the world is really, need in terms of technology, but also dive deeply into the actually process of, how startups are formed and how they're being funded, how they are scaling, how they are hiring, how they are, figuring out their business models and things like that. And I'm, really excited because, today we have, companies that have reached unicorn categories, and we were their first, believers in those days. So it's really incredible to see that evolution. But there's so much more to learn, so much more to kind of understand about this process of company building and then fund building for us, because UpWest is a startup, right?
Very true. So okay. So you mentioned how also as an early stage fund, there's obviously failure happens, and it's common for startups to fail. Obviously, there's 9 out of 10 startups fail, and I want to know, I love asking my guests, what is your perception of failure? What do you imagine failure as? And almost what do you kind of advise your entrepreneurs that you invest in when they fail or when they have a hiccup in the road? Like, how do you kind of get them through it?
It's interesting to hear you say, what is a failure? Because I think we all embrace it as something that, happens. And I think that, people grow from that. And it's, I think you fail if you don't try, right? In my mind, the failure is not trying and not, and giving up before you even start. Yeah. That's failure. So having given a lot of, I think, our conviction into founders who were just starting out and thinking that, they're going to build something. And obviously along the way, there are hiccups. There are founders who, don't get along, and there are founders who are unable to really find their product market fit. There are many ways why companies discontinue. Mm-hmm. It's not for the lack of, going at it and trying and building. And so for that, and always having that in mind, when you back founders, is that, you constantly remain on their side in terms of putting all resources behind for them to be successful. It's ultimately up to them to make it happen. Yeah. But I think, for us, it's about providing both a network of very experienced people around, providing, I would say, a place for founders to be able to share their challenges with each other.
Yeah.
And knowing that, you're accessible for a lot of the kind of things that happen both on their personal as well as their business side of things.
Yeah,
so that's from my mind is, the role of investors. I always say to founders, like, people who add value and people who don't interrupt with making things happen, right? And so there's a lot of people out there who are really great investors and know how to do it. But I think, for me, learning, how to really be meaningful and impactful in the journey of the founders as they build their companies is really interesting. It was an interesting journey for me.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great, and I think that's such an important aspect of almost the investor and entrepreneur relationship that you have. Like, I think that's what it should be. So talking about, obviously, this podcast is SheLeads, so all about the female leader. And I'd love to just get your perspective and kind of get a taste of your experience being a female inventor. And if you've often experienced being the only female in the room and really navigating around this, the dynamics that come with it. So I'm wondering, just generally, your experience as well as any tips that you have for these upcoming females or just any females who maybe are in a male-dominated space.
It started for me in the military because I was in artillery school. I was an instructor and mostly men, and then it continued, obviously, in business and in being in tech and being in Silicon Valley. Right. I don't need to tell you, but there was definitely shortage of women in all sorts of roles, and continues to be, although we do see improvements. I think our tendencies to doubt ourselves, first of all, as women, needs to just go away. And I think that is something that I've learned about myself. And I think, I'm seeing a lot of women around me who are so incredibly talented, capable, and can really make a difference and can really go out it and do things that, are really amazing, but they're holding themselves back. And I think that is one thing that I think I want to communicate to a lot of women and leaders and people that are starting out their careers and saying, you got what it takes, you definitely do. So I see the difference of how, men and women interact in business. And I see even, female founders versus male founders. And I think that is something that I want to see a lot less self-doubt and a lot more women who just say, yeah, I got it. I can totally go for it. I have to psych myself, about it all the time. Yeah. But I think that is part of, kind of looking at your environment and assess really, your abilities and being true to both your passion and what you want to do, as well as kicking yourself in the ass a little bit and saying, that's totally fine.
I agree. I think it's so important. I've mentioned it before, but I think it starts from us, like having that confidence, having that belief, because that really projects into a room of whoever you're with, and knowing that, okay, I belong here. I belong to sit at the head of the table or wherever it may be, and I belong here. So I think that's very true. So to wrap up, actually, before I ask you the two fun questions, I do want to.
Oh my God! I don't think I prepared for that.
Okay, we'll do it on a whim. But first, I do want you to just mention real quick about the advice for people in their 20s about almost this decade of discovery. Just tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap up.
So it's interesting because I have the analogy of a startup, right? Yeah. When I think about the early days, of you in your 20s, and the early days of a startup is a lot about discovery,
Mm-hmm.
because you do want to find a place where you are differentiated, where you can make an impact, where you can be a category leader in your industry.
Yeah.
And a lot of that involves, kind of doing a lot of conversations and discovery of how you fit into that industry. And I think that, when I think about people in their early 20s launching into the world, and I say, take the time to really discover who you are, means that, it's okay to take a gap year. It's okay to travel. It's okay to postpone the conventional way of doing things, for you to really find the essence of what you want to be and who you want to be and what you want to do, because you're going to be 10 times more successful if you actually discover, who you are. I think that society wants to put us in a box. And I think that is something that we kind of, get into very early on. And I think that's why living in different cultures, experiencing different cultures, being in a different pace of environment, and checking with yourself of how you're doing, and is this something that you gravitate for and you like, helps you later on to understand, how to both find what you want to learn more or study more, or what environment you want to work in. And I think it's really important. It's very hard today for young people to do all that, right? I mean, we can't travel, we can't really go out and do different jobs. And I think that whoever right now is working on how youth can do that during the next few years and during pandemic years, of how youth can experience life and where and what kind of environment, because a lot is going to change for them, and we don't want them to just sit at home because of that. This is the time to actually go out and discover things. So my thinking is always go out and learn from other people. Talk to a lot of people who are a little bit older than you. Because they've learned from some of the things that they've done and the paths that they've taken and things like that.
I love it. I love it so much. I think that's so great. Okay, so Shuly, I guess you're going to be put on the spot again, even though. But anyway, first question is, what's a passion or hobby that you have that's just unrelated to any work at all?
I would say in the last few months, it's been hiking.
Nice, yeah.
And being in nature. And I think that it's always been there. And I was backpacking a lot in my 20s. And then, had kids and, started, kind of, living the real life of work and trying to find balance. But I think that I'm finding more and more that this is where I, kind of feel great. So I have a dog. She's amazing. Aww. She's a golden retriever.
I love golden retrievers.
And we spend at least an hour a day, kind of before sunset, doing hikes around the trails here. And and I found that this is now, my happy place.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like a form of like a meditation type present moment.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a form of meditation, and
I think that's great.
And that's what I love doing.
All right, so a last question. First, I've loved this, so thank you for coming onto the show. But we have to end with, what is a weird or fun talent that you have that really no one knows about? So I'm going to go first, okay? So we have blueberries here, and I'm a blueberry thrower and catcher. All right, so here we go. Okay. Let's see how this goes. There we go.
Oh my God.
All right.
How many times did you practice this?
I've been practicing for years. This is my time to shine.
A weird talent. I don't think I have one. I'm going to have to adapt one. You're going to have to, maybe send me some
I'll send you a
weird
list.
talent.
Well, you can start with blueberries.
Definitely will. I will definitely do that.
Okay, well, Shuly, I've loved this, so thank you really so much for coming and just sharing your wisdom and insight being a Israeli powerful female in venture capital, and I've loved it, so thank you.
Thank you, and good luck on your journey.
Thank you.